The following announcement has been paid for by...
This podcast is presented by me, Marc Raimondi, author of Say Hello to the Bad Guys, How Professional Wrestling's New World Order Changed America. This is a discussion between Atlanta sports reporter Joe Patrick and myself about the new book, the NWO, and more generally, the impact of pro wrestling on culture. Say Hello to the Bad Guys is available right now on Amazon or wherever you buy your books.
Hey everybody, I'm Joe Patrick. I'm a friend of the man of the hour, Marc Raimondi, who has a fantastic book coming out on professional wrestling called
Say Hello to the Bad Guys.
Say Hello to the Bad Guys.
Professional wrestling's New World Order changed America.
So Marc and I know each other from covering the Atlanta Falcons here in Atlanta, Georgia. And one day while we were at practice, we got into conversating about this because I am a former wrestling fan, I should say. Not that I dislike it now, but as somebody, I just fell out of favor with me, and I got into a great conversation with Marc, not really realizing that he was writing a book about this, about just kind of our nostalgic experiences with the sport, and it's been fascinating to talk to him to understand just how much wrestling is woven into our culture. So I don't know how much we're actually going to talk about the book today, Marc, as opposed to just talk about America, wrestling, pop culture,
America,
how it's all kind of come together. So I want to ask you first of all, how did this idea even come to you?
So it's actually kind of a crazy story because it was not initially my idea to write the book. So I was, before I started covering the Falcons, I was a combat sports reporter for ESPN, and I covered mainly the UFC. And it was 2021, May, and I was in a hotel room in Houston, Texas, for a UFC fight.
This is where every great story starts.
Yeah, a random hotel room in Houston, Texas. And I got an email from someone who said that they were an editor at Simon & Schuster. And the email asked me if I wanted to write a book about the NWO. And I swear to you, like, I got this email and I'm sitting on the bed in the hotel room, and I'm like, well, this is a scam, this is like a phishing scam. Like, I'm going to get hacked, or I'm going to lose my social security number, or something like that. And so I had to Google the editor, whose name is Yadon Israel. So I had to make sure that this was a legit person and not some
phishing
some
experiment,
fake.
right?
Exactly.
Catfished.
Exactly. So
you would catfish Marc on an NWO book, by the way. That is a way to get.
That, yeah. I mean, yes, exactly. That would have been the way, because it was like, what? So I Googled him, and it turned out that he was a legitimate editor at Simon & Schuster, and I emailed him back, and we were on the phone talking probably within the next 30 minutes, and it was like so crazy because immediately, like, I had never spoken to him before, didn't know him, he didn't know me, but we immediately started kind of vibing about what we felt about wrestling and the NWO, and how that was the catalyst of the 90s boom, and how much all of that trickled into American culture and into like the zeitgeist, so to speak. Yeah. And this is just the first conversation that we had, and we were just like, wow, okay, so this is like a really good dynamic that we have right off the bat. And he was like, I want you to be the guy to write the book. So basically, to dial it back a little bit, when he got the job at Simon & Schuster, he wanted someone to write an NWO book, and he wanted to be the editor for it. So it was kind of his brainchild initially. And in 2019, the NWO got inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. And I was working for ESPN, and I was covering mainly the UFC, but I did do a little bit of pro wrestling. And when that happened, I was assigned the story to write about the NWO going into the Hall of Fame. So WWE hooked me up with interviews with Kevin Nash and Hulk Hogan, and I wrote a long story, longer than my editor at ESPN probably wanted for such a story, right? It was a news story. It was they were getting inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. Could have been a 500-word, get in and get out, be done with it. I think I wrote like 2,000 words because it was something that was so meaningful to me, and I'm a lifelong wrestling fan, and I was 11 years old when the NWO started, and I remember it vividly, and I was a fan throughout the whole, era of the 90s and beyond, and it was still like in my head, and it was like there was like I put kind of like my heart into that, story that could have been nothing. So turns out that Yadon from Simon & Schuster read that article. And that's how he tracked me down and found me. And he read the article and he's like, oh, this guy like completely overwrote this because he felt some type of way about the NWO. I think he's the guy that can kind of, you know, turn that whole thing into a book. And that's really where it started. So it's, you know, writing that article for ESPN, never had intended to write a book. I'm a beat writer.
Right.
Even now I cover the Falcons, but I was a beat writer for the UFC and I traveled with them to many, if not all of the big events for 11 years. And I never in my mind thought I'm gonna write a book right now because I just didn't have the time. I felt like I didn't have the time as a full-time, you know, beat writer. But when that opportunity comes across your desk, you don't say no because...
I have to imagine for you too, it was, you know, you talk about labor of loves, but I have to imagine that to some extent it kind of poured out of you, the book, just and how to research it and how to go about it, because I know the first conversation we had about this, kind of funny you telling that story, because I feel like our story was also kind of very similar where, you know, not that we weren't like collegial or whatever with each other, but we never had this conversation, and all of a sudden we got into a very kind of deep discussion about wrestling and its place in American society.
Certainly there were some parts of the book that came like very easy, and like I knew exactly how I wanted to write it, and I knew exactly how people want to kind of receive it, but other parts were definitely more challenging. For someone like me where, you know, if I'm writing a big feature for ESPN, it's going to be max 3,000, maybe 4,000 words. I think maybe I've written some that were closer to 5,000 back in the UFC days when I covered the UFC. But those were few and far between. So you're asking me now to write.
Yeah, how many is
this current version of the book is around 80,000 words. But the initial version that I sent in, the initial manuscript was like over 110,000 words.
Wow.
So for someone who's used to writing smaller pieces, articles, right, which is what I've done for 20 years as a journalist, this was like a whole different type of deal. And I had to also kind of like not write in a journalistic way. It still is. I mean, it's still me. It's still the kind of writing that I kind of do on a daily basis, but I had to write more literarily, I guess, than journalistically, which is what I was told by, you know, Yadon from Simon & Schuster. So that was definitely a challenge.
When did you start to sort of connect some of these bigger topics when we talk about American culture and like how it's been influenced? Like, is this already something you've been thinking about before you wrote the book? And when you were writing the book, did you kind of have any of these eureka moments or these epiphanies of like, oh, this is why it is? I'm just kind of curious what your reflections are.
100%, yeah. So before I had even gotten that email, I have talked about wrestling as being almost like the pulse of American culture for a very long time. You know, I've said like everything is wrestling. You can find wrestling in so many different things, in politics, in cable news, you know, in sports talk, right? I mean, there's an element of wrestling. I see wrestling everywhere I look. Everything that exists to kind of generate some kind of like hype or attention or storytelling. I see a lot of pro wrestling in influencers and social media.
I was just about to say, it kind of extends to all of us, because all of us now exist in this digital landscape where we're having to pretty much promote ourselves because a lot of these, you know, institutions have kind of fallen apart by means of technology. And so now you do see people in the cycle where they are having to promote themselves.
You have to be a character. Like if you're on the internet, you almost have to play like a version of yourself to generate engagement, to generate clicks, to generate people paying attention to you. And everyone is now kind of fighting for attention. And the best way to do that is to kind of take a page out of pro wrestling's book and develop like a persona and kind of be something that maybe is more interesting than who you really are.
Have you ever had the experience where you're familiar with somebody only on social media and you understand them as having a certain type of personality, and then you meet them in person and they're completely different, and it's almost always completely different in a much more quiet, reserved, like to themselves way than
many times.
And I imagine that's what wrestlers are like too. And I'm not talking about them personally, but just like, you know, they're out there being flamboyant,
Yes.
for lack of a better word, promoting themselves.
Yes,
Drawing attention.
I have met many people like that over the years where they're different in person, and I would even say like MMA fighters are that way, where they feel like there is a necessity for them to promote themselves a certain way on social media because their paycheck almost depends on it, right? Because the more attention you can get, the more people are going to tune in, buy your pay-per-view, buy your merchandise, so on and so forth, right? And then you see them and you meet them in person, and it's like, oh, they're not really like that person on social media. They're not like that person that's tweeting trash talk on Twitter. They're just a regular, normal, kind of down-to-earth person.
That's where, so I'm recently kind of have come into UFC and also taken appreciation for MMA, and of course you can't go into that space, especially as a consumer, without seeing Chael Sonnen either as a fighter or as a pundit or a promoter. And it's interesting hearing him talk about UFC fighters. He almost talks about them like in two different lanes. One of them is as a fighter, their combat skills, etc.
Right.
But it's also like just as important for them to be putting themselves out there and creating a narrative for an audience to understand.
To be entertainers, because it is the entertainment business as much as the sports business, especially in that world, in boxing, in MMA. You need to promote yourself because that is where the money comes from. It comes from how many people are paying to see me fight, and that doesn't exist like when we cover the NFL. Like when we're in the locker room with Drake London and Michael Penix Jr. and Bijan Robinson, they are certainly not thinking about how can I drive more interest into my game. That does not exist.
Maybe the opposite.
Yeah,
maybe
they want to
trying to not
exactly.
have
They're actively not doing that. But in MMA and boxing, you have to do that because if not, you're going to get left behind. Because being a great fighter is great, right? That's still number one priority. But if you're a great fighter and you don't drive interest in yourself in some way, and I would use someone like a Demetrius Johnson as an example of this, when he was at his height, he was probably the pound for pound best fighter in the world. And he still has the record for the most consecutive title defenses. I think John Jones might have, maybe he's not as consecutive, but Demetrius, he certainly, but yeah, Demetrius Johnson set the record, and it's like, this guy has like the best resume in terms of title defenses and championship victories out of anyone in the history of the UFC. But his numbers were not good. His pay-per-view numbers were not good, and his social media numbers were not good. And he's actually done a great job of that now after his career with his YouTube and his social media. And he's probably almost more popular now than he was then. And that just kind of speaks to combat sports and how it's incumbent upon the fighters to be more interesting. And one of the conversations that we had last year in the Jimmy Cribb media room at the Atlanta Falcons was how Muhammad Ali did that. And he was probably the first one in combat sports to become an entertainer as well as an athlete. And he kind of wrote the game plan. He wrote the playbook for that. And he did that because of pro wrestling. Because he was as a kid, he was in Los Angeles for media. He was boxing at the time. He was still Cassius Clay, and he went to a radio station, and he met Gorgeous George, who was one of the biggest stars in wrestling as a heel in the 50s and 60s. And Ali had gone. This was in LA, and he had gone to see a match, a wrestling event, and Gorgeous George was on the card, and he saw the kind of reaction that Gorgeous George got, and it was negative. It was boos, and Gorgeous George played this very flamboyant character with robes and platinum hair, and he had like perfume that he would spray, and he was very almost kind of effeminate in his actions, and man, people hated him because he was so cocky and so arrogant and so flamboyant. And Ali saw that, and it really made an impression on him because he saw that you can generate interest, you can generate engagement with fans by playing that type of character, and he pretty much adopted it. That's where he got "I'm so pretty," that's where he developed I'm the greatest. That was all stuff that he picked up from professional wrestling, and then of course Ali later went on and had a really high profile mixed rules fight with Antonio Inoki in Japan, which and Inoki was the biggest name pro wrestler in Japan at the time, and it was a really big deal there, and also here.
I didn't even know about that.
That's right.
And Muhammad Ali is as known for his boxing as he is for the character that he portrayed. In fact, a lot of people, when they think of Muhammad Ali, they think of actually the character. They might not even be able to tell you one result of his career fights.
Right.
But that just speaks to how important that is for him.
And like you can also boil that down to like the internet today and social media, how you almost, if you're going to be any kind of a social media, if that's your lot, if that's your vocation, right, and you're going to be a social media influencer, or if you're going to be whatever on social media, have some kind of a brand that you're building, even if it's like a business, you have to have some kind of a hook, you have to have some kind of a personality, some kind of a persona that you're putting on that is going to be entertaining. Because again, now it's you almost need it more now than ever, because there's so many things out there, and it's just an endless scroll, right? You're just scrolling. So what is going to make people stop the scroll? And you have to be kind of like an over-the-top almost character to be that.
Can I put another name out there?
Be my guest.
Deion Sanders. Comes onto the scene. Prime time. That's right. That's exactly right. He had his own name. He had his own brand. He had his own look that was totally different from anybody that was on the scene. And he was already the greatest. Well, not one of the greatest player, but one of the greatest prospects at that point to ever come out. There was no doubt really about his ability. But what he did in the media, I think, says more about who he is today, or is kind of it produced the Deion that we know today as a media member, and then obviously leading Colorado right now, as opposed to what he was as a player, which was successful, but that ultimately only takes you so far in your career.
Yeah, and now it's like he gets a lot of heat for kind of being that type of persona, because in football is, you need to kind of conform in football to be like everybody else. It's a very conformist. What I've learned, in 1 year covering the NFL, 1 year at least in the last 20 years covering the NFL, is that it's a very conformist league. You're supposed to fall in line. And my old worlds, covering the UFC, covering MMA, pro wrestling, it is not like that. You do not want to conform. You want to be different. You want to be unique. You want to be, you mentioned Chael Sonnen before. He's a perfect example of that, because early in his career, actually, for the majority of his career, I would say, even going past his athletic prime, he was kind of a vanilla
college wrestler, right?
College wrestler, very straight, very, not a lot of humor in his interviews, no trash talk, just very by the book, right? And it wasn't until later on in his career, very late in his career, where he started to talk an incredible amount of trash, but also in a way that was really entertaining. And that is what allowed him to, honestly, that's what allowed him to get the title shot in the first place against Anderson Silva, almost beat Anderson Silva, and then that was it for him. That made his entire career, because he was so compelling as a character that it got him the title shot. He lost, but it was a close fight. He was winning most of the fight, and he got a rematch, and he made millions in both of those fights. It extended his career because he was getting other big fights. He got the John Jones fight at light heavyweight, and then it played into him getting a role on ESPN as a pundit, as a talking head. And now he's still one of the most popular names in combat sports, because he made that adjustment late in his career. And also a good friend of mine, Chael. Thanks for
I saw he's already given a shout out.
He has one of these, and he's already it's right next to him when he does his videos, and I appreciate that very much, Chael.
Now this is a question I really wanted to get into. I feel like we've touched around it on the boundaries, but your book is about bad guys.
It is.
Why do we like bad guys? We shouldn't. It seems like we shouldn't. Why do we?
Well, I think it really all started in the 90s, right at the era of the NWO, right in that 90s period where, the 80s was all about the over-the-top heroes.
The triumphant hero.
Triumphant hero, the Rocky and Arnold Schwarzenegger and all of these, 80s. When you think of like 80s action movies, you're thinking of like these over-the-top stories where there's a good guy with a code and morals, and he's fighting for justice, and he's fighting for the right thing, the good, for righteousness, And that was the 80s, and things changed quite a bit in the 90s, and I go into this a lot into the book about because it was important for me to kind of contextualize where things were in the country when the NWO started.
Right.
The 80s were over. This was 1996, and things had drastically changed, where we're talking about now an era of the country politically where, you know, you're in economic recession, and there's a lot of anger in the country, and the music is changing. You know, it went from like, you know, the 80s where it was like power ballads and like hair bands to, you know, Marilyn Manson and Kurt Cobain
grunge,
and gangster rap.
Right, rap
grunge,
coming into the scene.
Right, you know, like NWA was huge in the early 90s.
And a counterculture started to emerge in the 90s.
And the NWO was, I think, a product of that, and it helped advance that because they were so of the time. And I mean, in the country also, like there was the Oklahoma City bombing.
Right.
Before 9/11, the World Trade Center got attacked as well in the early 90s.
There was the Olympic Park bombing right here in Atlanta.
The Olympic bombing in 96, right, exactly. So there was just an uneasiness in the country, whereas like the 80s was very like, you know, everyone was, it was kind of a happy time, the economy was good, and entertainment always kind of reflects what is happening. It's a mirror of what's happening in the real world. And to me, nothing mirrors the real world more than professional wrestling. So the mid-90s comes along, and you have, and this is a perfect example, right? You have Hulk Hogan, who was a name in the 80s that was probably up there with the Sylvester Stallones and the Arnold Schwarzeneggers as far as, you know, cachet, household name, certainly in the US, if not worldwide, right? A guy that everyone knows who he is.
Yeah.
So his 80s character was the bright colors, the red and the yellow, and he's the good guy, and he's going up against these foreign adversaries, right? He's facing the Iron
Giants.
Sheik,
It was like
and he's facing, you know, Andre the Giant, and he's facing like these big evil characters. You know, he's facing Sergeant Slaughter, who was a traitor to his country, you know, at WrestleMania, who was became an Iraqi sympathizer, you know, and it's like all of these very 80s type of storylines where that was also a big thing in the 80s where it was like America versus, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And wrestling was all about that as well. So you have this character that remained the same from when he became big in 84 and 85. And he was still doing the same stuff in like 93 and 94. And he signs with WCW, and he's still doing the same act. And in fact, they're kind of doing the same type of deal where he's facing the Giants again, and he's facing, you know, these evil characters. And the fans just started to kind of reject it. And the fans started to boo him. And the fans started to not want to hear about eating your vitamins and saying your prayers and training. They were not on board with Hulkamania by 96. So when he turned heel, that was to me the absolute like epitome,
like a paradigm shift seemed to have happened at that point.
Right. So that's the epitome of like 1990s, especially mid 90s culture, was the guy who was the ultimate good guy became just a rotten son of a bitch. You know, just a rotten, you know, cursing at the fans and just being an asshole, essentially. And you know, you see that scene at Bash at the Beach in 96 where, you know, he comes out and he turns on the good guys and he joins forces with Hall and Nash. And the fans in that arena were so furious about this, the way, because they were pushing him in that direction with their feedback. But when it happened and when he got the mic and he just let loose on the fans and the industry, and people just started throwing stuff at him. And it almost felt when I watching that back so many times, I felt like that was almost cathartic for him. You know, like that, because he had given a lot, you know. Say what you will about Hulk Hogan, and people will say quite a bit about Hulk Hogan, but he had given a lot to the fans and to the industry for over a decade, and they were turning against that character. And when he was giving that speech, that promo at Bash at the Beach, and he was letting the fans just have it, that was definitely therapeutic for him.
I think it was cathartic for the fans too. Like it felt like they were ready to let loose on him. There were frustrations, and
now they had a reason.
Exactly,
because
he gave them the reason.
He gave them the reason,
and it feels like that's the kind of hook that people need to really like start to feel passionately about these characters.
Yeah, and that's what makes wrestling so unique, because you have that real-time feedback where people are in, these are shows that are going on every week on national television in front of live crowds. And nothing is taped in advance. So every week, every episode of Monday Nitro then, of Raw, of SmackDown now, of AEW Dynamite, every episode you are getting feedback. It's almost like you're in front of a focus group every week. And that can help guide you. And that's why wrestling to me is so lined up and dialed in with the American consciousness and with what's going on in the world, because this is not a show where you tape 32 episodes and you air it week by week and it's already taped. This is a show where you adapt and you make changes based on what the crowd is saying, what's going on in the world, and there's just nothing else that exists like that.
You're totally right, and it really is almost a unique form of art and especially in our current society that has become so digitized. Everything is online, and you very rarely are able to get out in person to see a band or something. I would kind of put a band on a similar kind of level. They don't have the same kind of crowd interaction that a wrestler does, but it's performance art that is happening live in front of you. And to your point, they're able to get feedback from the crowd and adapt their performances.
And it's storytelling, right? And it's storytelling, and that's something I was having a conversation with, I don't want to say anyone's name, but it was someone in the UFC, and this is before they merged with WWE, and they were trying to tell me that, or they were at least asking my opinion about, don't you think that wrestling is kind of like passe? Like it's kind of like because
this is how I felt for a long time.
Right, because of the internet and because of all the things, don't you feel like wrestling is kind of like an anachronism? It's not relevant anymore. And I said, absolutely not. In fact, I think it's actually as relevant, if not more relevant than it ever has been, because of their ability of storytelling. Because everything is storytelling, everything, and they have that medium down pat. And like you just said, and like we had said before, it's storytelling in front of the live crowd with real-time feedback that reflects what's going on in the world. And it is certainly not an art that everyone loves, but I would argue that if everyone gave it a chance, there would be elements of it that they would find interesting. And it's kind of like a variety show. Right. Like I think I wrote in the book, I had a line in the book where it's like wrestling is almost like a TikTok algorithm come to life. Because if you're watching a 3-hour episode of Raw or SmackDown, you may not like everything on there. You might scroll past, but there's gonna be a few things that you're like, oh, that's interesting. Like that character's interesting, or that story's interesting.
You might not even like to admit that you find it interesting.
That's another thing too, is that there are wrestling fans that are like in the closet, like they're afraid, like and I've met so many of them over the last few years, because like I just wear NWO gear everywhere I go, including on a lot of road trips, and the amount of people that remember and recognize the logo is just unbelievable to me. It's astounding. And it's like people that you would never guess was a wrestling fan. And they were, or they still are, but they don't. It's not something that you talk about in like mixed company very often. It's almost like something that's you're embarrassed, like a guilty pleasure. But I'm telling you, there's no reason to feel guilty, guys. This is the greatest art that America has bestowed upon the world, and we should embrace it. We should embrace pro wrestling.
Let me ask you this though, just to play devil's advocate on that particular point. Could wrestling hit a level of popularity that's so high that it like kind of becomes obsolete in and of itself? Like, it is the fact that it is, I don't know if niche is the right word, because it is so broad-based, but the fact that it is like a guilty pleasure or something you don't always put out there, especially for certain kinds of people. Obviously, hardcore fans are going to be, out there about it. But I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking out loud to myself if that is kind of a particular aspect of wrestling. And I want to kind of just to go back to let people kind of know a little bit about my story and like my association with wrestling. When I was a kid, huge fan. Like my parents would not let me watch it pretty much. So I had to like go to a friend's house to watch. Because it was like, at the time, it was like as like raunchy or gruesome as anything I would see on television or in a movie at that point. when I was, 6th, 7th grade, that type of thing. And but ultimately, I kind of mentioned this. Maybe the mask came off for me when they turned the Undertaker into the American Badass or something, and and I got it was too harsh of a realization. But you brought me back. Earlier this year, we started going to some independent wrestling shows, and that got me to appreciate wrestling on a level that, I don't think no WWE pay-per-view would ever get me to appreciate.
Sure.
Why do you think that those independent wrestling shows did that to me?
I always try to drag people to independent wrestling shows. When I lived in LA, I tried to drag people to as many shows as I could, and same here now in Atlanta, and I've converted my friend Joe here. And the reason why is because I think that it's harder to appreciate on the screen. And I think that there's also this stigma against WWE and pro wrestling as a whole, because WWE is kind of like the Kleenex of pro wrestling, right? It's like, that's kind of like a catch-all. People say WWE in place of pro wrestling, the way they say like UFC in place of MMA. So, but there's a stigma against WWE as kind of being this like lowbrow entertainment. Oh, why are you watching that? Don't you know it's fake type of stuff? And that's, aren't you, you're 40 years old. Why are you still watching? This stuff is for kids.
Again, echoing things that I would have said 5 years ago. Or 10 years ago.
Yeah, certainly. But the truth is that it's not just for kids. It's for everyone. It's for anyone. And it's just entertainment. And the thing about the independent scene is that you're in a small place, you're close up, it's an interactive environment. And if the performers are good, which they are here in Atlanta, I will say that. Shout out to the local talent here. If the performers are good, they can engage an audience. Like, where else are you going to go on a Friday night or a Saturday night where you're going to basically get a variety show with stunts in front of you? It's like if you go to Universal Studios and you watch like a stunt show. Yeah. Well, imagine that with no special effects, in a ring like 10 feet away from you, where people are flying out of the ring, and they're also actively like talking trash to you if you're the heels, or they're trying to get you behind them if you're the baby faces. And it's like this, and they're telling a story inside the confines of a match. Every match has its own story. Every character has their own story, right? And they're trying to explain to you, they're basically, with their actions and whatever they're doing and saying, they're trying to explain to you who their character is, what their motivations are, what is going on in the match. And it's like, there's just nothing else like that exists. And I think when you're that close to it at an independent show, it all kind of comes together for you. And it's harder to kind of get that on TV. WWE is so polished and it's so produced, and it's, don't get me wrong, I don't say that necessarily in a negative way, but because it looks so good, that you almost lose the effect of how raw and real it can be. If you're in an independent show, there is no losing that effect. You see people's bodies hitting the freaking mat at a very high acceleration, and you might want to say it's fake. The magic of wrestling is the fact that they're not trying to hurt each other, but make no mistake, everything hurts. It's just, the magic is they just have a very high threshold for pain. It's not, they're not trying to hit each other, but they're not trying to hurt each other, but they're hitting each other.
It's one of the things that I came to realize very quickly in going to those shows was that while the result may be prearranged and the moves and everything, the impact that those guys are taking in a match takes serious athleticism to be able to pull off, and then just obviously a matter of toughness to be able to endure, especially when you're doing it as much as these guys do. Yeah,
that's crazy too, because if you're on the independent scene, you're not making much money, and you're very likely wrestling 2 to 3 times in a weekend. And maybe 3 to 4 times a week. And depending on where you are, and if you're traveling, or if you have kind of a home base where there's a lot of shows. Like Atlanta has a lot of shows, and those guys and girls are wrestling quite often, and they're getting every one of them is beat up. Every one of them.
For sure. And to go back to the point that you made about it being kind of like a variety show, it's funny that you say that, because afterwards I was recommending it to people to go to some of these shows. I was like, guys, like next time there's one, I'll let you know. We got to go. And these are not particularly wrestling fans. They don't know me as a wrestling fan either. So they're kind of confused when I'm the one who comes up to them and is like, you got to go to this. And the way I describe it to them, like, why should they go? You're not going to get better entertainment for $20 or however much it costs to go to these things. Ours is $20. And that's about as much as I can describe it, because I'm not going to tell them, oh, you got to go see this young fighter, or this is going to be a great match. I don't even know what the matches are on a particular show.
Sure.
But I just know that I'm going to be entertained, and I'm all the more. I have so much more respect. Well, I shouldn't say more respect, but a ton of respect for people who do the smaller independent shows because of the intimacy involved in the venues. And therefore, with the people who are attending, you're talking about it being interactive. They're literally telling us, "Give me your chair. I'm gonna hit this guy with it," And so, like,
or move. I'm gonna jump out of the ring and crash into all the chairs and knock everybody over.
And sometimes they tell you to move, and then you move, and then they laugh at you for moving, which is like really twisting the whole thing around. But it's still, at the end of the day, great entertainment.
Correct.
Like,
because there, I mean, it's almost like an improv. It's improv, it's like interactive, it's theater, it's kind of sports, it's a little bit of everything. And that's why, like, you said, like, these people are not wrestling fans, but if you go to one of these independent shows, you don't need to be a wrestling fan. And I think you pick it up very quickly. You don't need to be explained. Nothing really needs to be explained to you necessarily.
Exactly.
Because at the end of the day,
better off that it's not explained to you.
Better off, yeah. Because at the end of the day, all it really is it's storytelling. It really is storytelling, and it's characters, and everyone enjoys that. Everyone. There's no one who doesn't enjoy storytelling to some degree, whether they read books or they watch movies or they watch Netflix or what have you, or they watch.
It's the way we understand things.
It's the way we understand things, and when wrestling is good, I don't think there's any method of entertainment that's better than wrestling because of all those things that we listed, because it encompasses so many different things. And I think that if people got out to independent shows, they would appreciate it more like you have, because it's in your face and you can't avoid kind of what it is. When it's on TV, you can kind of like tune it out and kind of like laugh at it and say, oh, this is for kids. But when those guys jump off the top rope and they're slamming into the mat, or they're doing something that makes you laugh, or they're doing things that you feel things.
Yes.
And that's what wrestling is all about.
Yes.
About manipulating an emotion out of the crowd. And when you have good wrestlers, even on the independent scene, who can do that, whether they can make you mad or they can make you, you can be upset by something that happened. You can laugh at something. All of those things get taken into account. And there's so few mediums that, if you sit down for 3 hours on a Friday night live at something, that you get all those things in one place.
This is how I've always judged a movie, by the way. It's kind of off topic, but it's like, did it make me feel something? Did at any point during this movie did I get truly sad or truly happy, or like did I laugh or something like that? That's how I judge a movie, and it's funny. Like, you're totally right that.
A number of years ago, there was a show when I was living in LA, and there was a show in Long Beach, and it was one of the first shows that New Japan Professional Wrestling did in Long Beach, and in the United States actually, but it was in Long Beach, California. And I remember I brought a friend of mine to the show. His name is Shaheen. He was a guy that worked with at MMAfighting.com, and he stayed with me in LA, and we went to the show. And there was a tag team match was the main event. It was the Young Bucks versus Kenny Omega and Kota Ibushi. And it was a great match for the athleticism, but it was a better match, a classic match, because of the story they were telling, where one guy on the team was friends with the other team, but they were kind of beefing, I guess, at the time. And there's also that competitiveness, that competition, where both teams were trying to prove themselves as being the best tag team. But there were also some feelings there between the characters, right? Where I don't want to completely destroy this guy because he's my friend, and it's supposed to be, a fight. And it was a really well done match. And I remember the next morning, because my friend Shaheen stayed over, the next morning, like, we were about to eat breakfast, and he was like, man, I'm still thinking about like how that match made me feel. I didn't know that wrestling could make me like feel something about that, because that's what it's supposed to do. If you let it, you have to let it. Like anything else, you have to let it. And he was just like blind. He was not a wrestling fan at all. Never was as a kid either, really. But that brought out an emotion that he had not expected, and that's what wrestling can do if you kind of let it.
100%. And I had this experience too. Like, when I went to that first independent show, I go in and I'm, acting normal, acting like the person that I am before I walk in there. And then, 30 minutes later, I'm like standing up, yelling at the ref. I'm like, it's crazy. And it makes me think about this concept of voyeurism within the context of wrestling, where like it allows us to indulge in aspects of our personality
Right.
or intrigue in somebody else's life or lifestyle that we feel a certain type of way about.
Yep.
I don't really know how to lead you any more than that, but like, how does that play into like our psyches when we consume wrestling?
So every time I think of wrestling as almost like a sociological experiment.
Yeah, it really is.
Like every event is a sociological experiment, and I'm always so curious about what is happening in the ring or on the microphone or what have you that elicits a certain reaction from the fans. What is the domino effect? What is the dynamic between what is happening and how the fans are reacting, and why are they reacting in a certain way? Why do certain wrestlers and characters get over? And that's a wrestling term for like become popular and become more, the fans want to see them more, right? What is it about them? What are they doing? Because there is no formula to this, and that's something. And if there was, Dana White would be very happy, right? Because the UFC is in a similar position, and WWE would obviously they would be the biggest entertainment brand in the world because they would know the formula for building a star and building someone that is truly compelling and that the fans really want to see. So that is one of the things that I'm so curious about, because to me, that says everything about us as human beings, not wrestling. It is a statement on us
100%.
and about society and the environment that we're in and who we are as people. It's psychology, it's sociology, because it's a fake fight at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So what are you doing inside the confines of this pseudo sport, right? What kind of things are you doing to be entertaining that you're getting regular people, regular Americans to cheer for you, to chant your name, to boo you, to say that you suck, to curse you out, whatever, to make you feel something. People cry, I mean, wrestling can elicit so many different emotions.
Yeah.
And when I went to these independent shows, the ones that you went to as well, I think I asked you this question too. I asked everyone that went, which character stood out most to you and why? And that's a sociological experiment.
Yeah, it really is.
Because is that because you relate to them? Is it because there's a version of that character in your life? Is it just because they were funny, or is it, you know what I mean? And all of that says so much about who we are. And that's why wrestling is just endlessly fascinating to me. And I can never get enough wrestling, because every show is unique, every crowd is unique, and the storytelling is unique in a way that, it's not the same as like movies and television.
Yeah.
And how do those crowds respond to those stories and those characters? And I'll just constantly consume that like for the rest of my life, because I'm so interested in people and cultures and why people react to certain things. And wrestling is all about getting them to react and manipulating that reaction.
Yeah, it almost makes you, it almost reveals things about you, or at least this is how I felt about it, is that it actually revealed some things about me that I didn't even realize about myself.
That's right.
For a product, an entertainment product, to be able to do that for $20, by the way, in this case, like incredible. Like that in and of itself is like a miracle, and I'm wondering why wrestling, well, I mean, we've talked about it, but it's amazing, I guess, that wrestling is able to do that, professional wrestling, something that is fake, like that's not hidden,
right? And
it is still able to be an art form that's really unlike anything else.
I think that, and maybe this is kind of ironic, because if you go to an independent show, and you have to want to do this, right? Because you can go to a show and just completely shut yourself down and be like, oh, this is silly, this is hokey, whatever. Yeah. And it could be silly. Yeah. But it's like a lot of things are silly, and you still, it's all about embracing it. It's all about kind of letting yourself enjoy it. And if you let yourself enjoy it, it does bring out something. Our friend Mike Rothstein, right? My predecessor on the Falcon Speed for ESPN. We just had lunch with him actually. The first show that he went to, and he's gonna probably watch this and be mad at me that I brought this up. The first show that he went to was the first one that you went to, and you, by like the second match, you were like, all right, you were all in. But he was still kind of like sniping and like, oh, this is fake and this, but the second time we went, there was a match. Yeah. There was a tag team match that had this man on his feet chanting and clapping, and he all pretext was gone.
Yeah.
All of that the guard was gone, and it broke him. And I don't mean to say that like in a bad way, but it opened him up to that feeling. Because it's okay to feel things. It's okay to let wrestling kind of take you on that ride. It unlocks a little bit of the inner. I think for me, when I go to these events, I feel like, all right, I can be like a kid again, 100%. And I can chant and cheer, and it's like that's acceptable. And it's like you don't have to keep your guard up, and you don't need to try to be cool and try to be. You just kind of let the wrestlers take you on that ride, and you just 100%. Go with it and have fun. And I always I love going to live events. It's one of my favorite things to do in the world because of that.
It's interesting because you brought me to my first event, and I never would have gone had I not had somebody.
Most people have no idea, because there is this stigma that exists, and most people would never even think to go to an independent wrestling show.
Right.
When the reality of it is that, I brought dozens of people to independent wrestling shows over the years, and very few of them had a bad time. I would almost say that almost none of them had a bad time, and most of them want to come back for another show.
Yeah.
Because it is truly a great means of entertainment if you let it be. But if you're going to be too cool for school and say, oh, it's wrestling is fake, well, then you can go somewhere.
I saw a couple of people leave in tears watching the death match that we were watching. But other than those people, I think everybody else was having a
but I mean that's an emotion.
Exactly. They felt something.
They felt something. Yeah. There was a match where there was an exploding bat.
Yeah.
And like fireworks on a bat, and no one knew that it was coming. And the wrestler swung the bat, hit his opponent, and it went bam! And like it was like a firework in a small thing, and we were like, holy crap! But I mean,
it was incredible. And on this topic of letting loose, I also was thinking about this because again, I've been to 3 shows so far with Marc.
That's right.
That first show was the one where people left crying. But again, I was lucky enough to have Marc who invited me, and then I'm kind of also like picking up on a little bit of your energy when you're in there, and I'm seeing that you're letting go. So then it's like, oh, okay, well, I feel like I have permission now to do the same, because like my personality and kind of the way I grew up is just like stoic, you keep a professional appearance at all times, and that, like, first of all, being around that helped me. And then the last show we were at, we're here in Midtown Atlanta, and the entrance is basically a garage door, so it's a big wide entrance.
It's a warehouse with a giant garage door in front.
And as one of the main event fights is taking place, very entertaining athletic fight, there was a bunch of young, preppy-looking college age, maybe just young professional. I won't say kids, but young adults outside,
20s and 30s,
watching in. They had stopped with their drinks, looking in and being entertained, and and it's like they couldn't. For some reason, maybe it was just too much of a hassle to pay the $10, $20, whatever it is to get in at that point. But they clearly were intrigued by what they saw through that door and wanted to watch. And then, I don't know who gave them the okay, but somebody gave them the okay. They all come in, and the atmosphere from that point was absolutely electric, and they were clearly loving it. And I'm curious if those kinds of people ever, if they come back next time that comes around.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the answer is maybe. You don't know. There's so many. Look, the thing, and here's another thing about wrestling too that I find fascinating, is that as much as it's sociology, it's also a business. So it's also the business of sociology to an extent, right? Because how do you put on?
That's why the real psychos run wrestling promotions and combat promotions.
So it's like, how do you develop a compelling enough product to get people coming back? So if you're on the independent scene, what does that look like? And if you're WWE, what does that look like? How do you get people coming to the show? Because I mean, WWE they do 2 live shows every week. Actually 3 if you count NXT. There's Raw, NXT, SmackDown, all live shows, and they need to sell tickets to these shows. These shows get ratings on cable. I mean, that's an incredible undertaking. Imagine an event business where you're doing 3 live shows, and Raw and SmackDown are on the road every week in a new place where you're trying to sell 10, 15, 18,000 tickets in these basketball arenas. And WWE's on a run now where they're selling out everything, right? What, like, Taylor Swift can't do that.
Right.
Where you're running 2 shows a week for like forever. Like Raw's been going since '93.
Right.
You know,
longer than Taylor Swift's been alive.
Yeah, exactly. So that is such an incredible thing that they're able to do, because nothing else is like that. Where you're selling tickets and selling out basketball arenas twice a week forever.
Yeah.
You know, but business is not always good. It's sometimes down, and it ebbs and flows. But anyway, to kind of make my point, it is. That is a business. There's a business aspect to it. So if you're an independent show, you have to kind of think of it on your scale. How do you give a product that makes people want to come back in a world where there's so many things to do? You know, even not even just like out here, you know, in Atlanta, but also, you know, there's video games, and you can just scroll on TikTok all night, or you know, there's Netflix, and you know, how do you compete against these things? And that's the question that independent promoters have to ask themselves, because most independents no one's getting rich on independent wrestling in the United States. Some people maybe are breaking even, some people are making a profit, but it's hard to actually make a real business out of that. Yeah. But that's the idea, and that's the business of wrestling, and that's also what I find incredibly interesting and fascinating about wrestling, is that it's sociology, but then you have to, how do you monetize that sociology, right? How do you leverage that? How do you leverage that, making people feel things into making them feel enough that they want to put their hard-earned money into a ticket or a pay-per-view?
And it kind of makes me think, going back to the discussion we had about Hulk Hogan and turning heel and kind of reinventing himself in a way. In the research that you did for this book, and this may have been reported by other people as well who have written about professional wrestling and the NWO, but was Hulk Hogan the brainchild? Did he recognize that was happening and feel like there was a need for him to do this? Was he led by Vince McMahon or somebody else who recognized this? When we talk about these, what do you call them? Like, I don't want to call them like a puppeteer, but like, you know, these masters of sociology who run these big wrestling promotions. Who knew that like this was going to be something that could kind of take?
Him turning heel.
Yes, yeah. And the NWO's formation in general, I would say.
Right. So Eric Bischoff was the executive producer, senior vice president of WCW at the time. So the NWO was his brainchild. It was his creative. It was his storyline that he created. Now Hulk Hogan was not going to be part of that initially. Okay. That was kind of a happy accident for them. Okay. The NWO was going to exist without Hulk Hogan. It was going to be Sting and Hall and Nash, right? That was like plan A. And
was that like to kind of combat the Hollywood, or he wasn't Hollywood Hogan at the time, but like the hero Hogan.
So basically, yeah. I mean, so that was basically everyone knew. So to kind of rewind a little bit, everyone knew that Hulkamania was kind of coming to an end, including Hulk Hogan and his inner circle. Right. And they didn't really know exactly how to adapt and how to change things up, because it was something that he did for a decade, and it made him so much money, and it made him incredibly famous, and he did a bunch of Hollywood movies and series and whatnot. So a year before the NWO started, Eric Bischoff, who had really just gotten the job as senior vice president of WCW, he flew down to Florida to Hogan's home in the Tampa area, and he pitched him the idea. What if you became a bad guy? What if you became a heel? And at the time, this was '95. At the time, Hogan basically told him, "Sorry, I gotta go pick up my kids."
That's the natural human reaction.
He said you never walked a mile in my boots, brother. Right. You know. And he basically said, "I gotta go pick up my kids from school. Sorry, you gotta go." And that was it. They didn't even finish like their beer that they were drinking on his couch. So he dismissed it right away. But he also knew in the back of his head that times were changing and that the opinions of fans were changing. And the one thing that I would say about Hulk Hogan, especially then, is that he really truly had his finger on the pulse of what fans wanted and where fans. He was so good at that, because wrestling is like, the matches itself are predetermined, but there's a kind of varying degrees of how choreographed a match is. Every wrestler is kind of different in their style of how they like to, lay out a match. Some people like to lay out the entire match. They write it down on paper, what's going to happen step by step, and then they go over it. Hulk Hogan was not one of those people. He was actually the opposite. He didn't like to really choreograph any part of the match. He liked to go into the match and listen to the crowd and let the crowd kind of direct him. And not everyone can do that. You just can't. But if you're Hulk Hogan and you've been in front of the biggest crowds for a decade, if going back even more than that, and you've been at the pinnacle of the profession, that was really his superpower.
It wasn't a chef. Like after time, you know what you need to do to add to enhance the dish.
Right. So he would, and like this is a guy that some people would argue that he's not a very good wrestler. He's not doing any like crazy athletic stuff.
I don't remember anything of particularly as far as a wrestling move.
Right. But he was able to put on compelling matches because of the way that he would take the crowd on a ride. By not doing a whole lot. And to me, that's actually an incredible credit to him, because he didn't need to do any flip. He didn't need to do a moonsault. He didn't need to do anything risky, really. It was punch, kick, leg drop, big boot, leg drop. And that was enough to make him the biggest star ever in wrestling. Just those few moves, because he was so damn good at being in there, listening to what the crowd wanted, and letting that take over the match, and letting him kind of go with that. I don't even know how to maybe almost like music. Like he's not there. Like the crowd is the composer, and Hulk Hogan is just kind of going with what the crowd wants until the finish of the match. And to me, that's an incredible credit to him. But to get back to what I was saying is that he was so good at that. So he knew very well what the fans wanted. So when he turned in '96, it was actually his. Because he was in Calabasas, California, in like the mountains above LA, where the Kardashians live now, and he was filming a movie called Santa with Muscles, right?
Classic 90s hit right there.
Classic movie, cult favorite, and every week he would get a FedEx VHS of Nitro. Every week from Jimmy Hart in Florida, wherever Jimmy Hart was at the time, who was his like real life manager and also like on screen, confidant, also like a heel manager, forever. And he would ship Hogan on Tuesday morning, Tuesday, and he would get the VHS and he'd watch it in his trailer of Nitro. And when Hall and Nash showed up on Nitro, Hogan was incredibly intrigued. And these guys came in. They're waging war on WCW. They're invading with the implication that they're still working for the WWF, and they're coming down and they're invading. And it was this incredibly compelling storyline where these guys were coming in. They had baseball bats and they're taking over the entire show. And Hogan's getting the VHS tapes and he's watching it in his trailer in Calabasas, and he's like, interesting. And Hall and Nash are on TV teasing a third man. And the idea at that time that Eric Bischoff had was, all right, we're going to introduce this new group. It's going to be really interesting. Hogan is not going to be on TV for several more months. He was going to come back like in the fall. And this was in May and June and July. One day, Bischoff gets a call in his office from Hogan. And Hogan wants Bischoff to fly to California, fly to LA, and sit down with him. So, of course, it's still the biggest star in wrestling. You go, So Bischoff gets on a flight the next day, flies to LA, gets there late at night, takes a cab to the mountains in Calabasas, pulls up to Hogan's trailer, gets in, they crack open a beer, Hogan's got a cigar, and the first thing Hogan says is, "So, brother, who's the third man?" And Bischoff is like, he doesn't want to say it was going to be Sting. He doesn't want to, but he doesn't want to say anything because first of all, you tell Hogan it's Sting, and Hogan goes and tells his buddy, and his buddy tells somebody, and all of a sudden it's in the wrestling media a week later. So Bischoff says, "Who do you think it should be?" And Hogan says, "You're looking at him, brother." That was it.
So nearly 30 years later, Hulk Hogan is speaking at a presidential convention for the current president of the United States.
Who's also in the WWE Hall of Fame.
Who's also in the WWE Hall of Fame.
right.
How did we get from point A to point B, and what does that say about this whole thing?
I would argue that it actually started all in 1998, where Hulk Hogan was running for president, which he didn't actually do, but that was the conversation. And yes, he absolutely did talk about running for president, did a bunch of talk shows about running for president. Once even said that he didn't want to be like all the other politicians, and he would rather have someone who would keep America first, which sounds very familiar now.
Does sound familiar.
But the reason why that even happened with Hogan running for president is because in 1998, remember Jesse Ventura?
I do, yeah.
80s star, became a commentator.
I don't know him as a wrestler.
Okay, just
not to give anything away here, but yeah, he was the governor of Minnesota.
Right, Jesse the Body Ventura ran for governor of Minnesota. And his theory and his goal was to generate enough attention and support, fundraising, petition, to get on the debate stage. Because he felt like if he got on the debate stage, you can't beat a pro wrestler in a debate. You're not operating on the same playing field if you're one of these career politicians and you're going up against a pro wrestler who is like muscular and jacked and is charismatic and can really connect with the people as his profession. That's what he did as a profession, to everything we talked about before about manipulating the crowds and everything like that. And he was freaking right. He got on the debate stage and he out-debated all the other candidates in Minnesota, and he won the election. And I think that you could take that moment in time and then Hulk Hogan kind of making it a storyline, him running for president, and you can kind of then put it several years later, several decades later, in 2016, when Donald Trump is running for president, and no one thinks this man has a chance to win, let alone win. Not even get the nomination for the Republican Party. Right, because he had to go through the whole primary. But you got him on the debate stage, and now let me add some context to this. Donald Trump has been following wrestling and has been a fan of wrestling and has been involved in wrestling since the 80s. He hosted WrestleMania 3 and 4 WrestleMania 4 and 5 at his Atlantic City casinos in Atlantic City. He was the host. He was right there if you go back and watch it on Peacock, he's right there in the front row for all this stuff. And Vince McMahon is one of his best friends in the world. Still is, was then, still is, several decades later. And Trump always followed pro wrestling. And then he was involved later on in storylines where at WrestleMania, it was a hair versus hair match. He was in one corner and Vince McMahon was in the other corner, and he ended up shaving Vince McMahon's head right there at WrestleMania. And he gave him a clothesline too. So this is someone that has studied pro wrestling and has been involved in pro wrestling for so long, so much to the point where he was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame long before he ran for president in 2016. So anyway, there's the context. Now, he gets on the debate stage and he's going up against these career politicians who could not be, just are so uninteresting. And they're just dorks, they're geeks. Right?
Can I interrupt just as
absolutely?
It's the Shane Gillis joke of you've got the guy who's talking about religion, you got the guy who's talking about education, you got the guy who's talking about this, and you got Donald Trump who's saying your wife is fat.
Shane Gillis is hilarious, by the way, and 100%, and that is something that he captured the attention of everyone, even the people that hated him. Everyone was watching because it was wrestling. It was reality television. He was just torching these people at the debates. And they just had no answer for him. The same way in 98 when Jesse Ventura ran for governor and he got on the debate stage and he just smashed all these career politicians because they just had it was like he wasn't even in the same genre as them, right? It was like he was doing a debate as a pro wrestler and they were doing a debate as politicians. Well, guess who wins those debates? And now we know who wins those debates in America. It's pro wrestlers. And Donald Trump came in as a pro wrestler and he was talking crap and he was insulting people and he was cutting promos and he just kept on doing that and doing that and doing that. The crowds, the campaign speeches, more debates, and he won the primary. And he kept on doing that and doing that and doing that. And everyone is saying, there's just no way this guy can win. And I'm saying to myself, being someone that knows and has studied pro wrestling, this guy is going to win because he is so much more interesting than everyone else, because people tune out politicians Donald Trump had the entire country, and still does to an extent, for better or worse.
Right, of course.
For however you feel politically.
It makes you feel something, you know?
Yes,
It makes you feel.
He has had the whole country by the neck since he started running for president in like 2015. And
He's the fascination of the world, really. I mean, and part of that is his office, but like it's the character that he is.
Yes.
Captures are enrages.
And when he's running for president again in 2024, and it's horrible because there was an assassination attempt at a speech in Pennsylvania.
Right.
And it was not fake. There was nothing fake about it. That was not pro wrestling. Mm-hmm. But he did not get hit by the shot, or maybe he got grazed. We don't know. He was bleeding, right? But the man had the ingenuity and the knowledge of how to operate in front of a crowd and how to entertain and how to compel people, that he got up with Secret Service grabbing him, and he got up and he pumped his fist. And at that moment, that's when he won the election in 2024. And that was as pro wrestling of a moment as you're gonna find, because he had the wherewithal. Screw getting shot again. He knew that was a moment. He understood the environment that he was in, and he would take the risk to maybe getting shot to get that photo, because that's what he knows. He knows the entertainment business. He knows pro wrestling, and he executed that perfectly. And he won again, and he won again. Yeah. And you ask me how the NWO changed America. You dial it back to the 90s, and everyone then was, how old are you?
38.
38. 30, it's his birthday today. I can't believe it. Everyone who was around the same age as you, I'm 40, a little bit younger, a little bit older, for the most part, we all grew up watching wrestling.
Yeah.
And now today, we're doing whatever we're doing in this world, whether we're reporters, or you're a writer, or you're a producer, or you're into music, or you're anything that you do. You could be a waiter, a waitress. That period of time influenced you because that was your upbringing. And now we're in a world where pro wrestling is everywhere, and it's because of our own creation. Yeah. We've created this world because we watched it then, and now we're all kind of in our own way emulating what we saw on Raw and Nitro in the 90s, including the President of the United States.
That's amazing to think about. That's almost like a mind F right there to think about. But I can't wait to read more about it, honestly, in this book. Comes out, when does it come out?
June 24th is the release date, but it is available right now wherever you get your books, on pre-order, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target and Walmart. And by the way, Target and Walmart I'm most excited about, Joe, because we're talking about changing America.
Yeah.
That's America.
Yeah,
right?
It is. Absolutely.
Not everyone is going to go and seek out a book on Amazon or go find it in your local independent bookstore. But if you're in Walmart grabbing your groceries for your kids, just regular American, and you see the book there, you might, and you remember the 90s, which most people are going to of a certain age, they're going to grab the book. And that makes me very excited to see that it's going to be where real Americans, shop, not just like the hoity-toity, like literary set. Like real Americans are going to buy this book, and that's exciting to me.
Or like me getting it on my phone on Amazon. But I do have my pre-order in, so you got one from me.
All right, excellent.
Are you doing an audiobook for it too?
Yes, the audiobook is done. It was many hours in the studio in Decatur, Georgia, and it was a lot, but it was fun. And I think you'll really enjoy my Hulk Hogan impression when I read his quotes.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Brother.
We get voices. That is amazing. Can't wait to read the book. Marc, thank you so much for having me here with you to discuss what is, I think, a fascinating topic.
Thanks for the interview, Joe. I appreciate it, man. Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.